Hey everyone, Technic here. I'm a little late to the party because I did not expect this YouTube channel to be growing as much as it is now. But before I work on another video, I decided to, as a 1000 subscriber special, to make a video in honor of PS Vita hacking. And what better way to do this other than teaching you about the wild back and forth war that Sony and the PS Vita hacking community had. So today, I present to you the history of PS Vita hacking in 2023. Brief history. The PS Vita was released on December 11, 2011 in Japan and February 22, 2012 in North America and Europe, and it took the world by storm. Not because of its amazing features and amazing games, but unfortunately because of the price tag. The Wi-Fi 3G model retailed for $249, later changed to $200, and the memory card retailed for about $15 to $80 depending on the size you got. It also didn't help that the 3G model was advertised to be able to play games online, but the service was unfortunately through AT&T in America, which wasn't so well received, given its reputation at the time. It also didn't help that the device was basically half the price of a PlayStation 3 at the time, and this resulted in the device not performing so well in America, but it definitely thrived a lot more in Japan and Europe because of the different service providers. Despite the hardships the PS Vita went through, this did not stop the Sony hacking community noticing one very important detail. This was a very powerful device. Ever since that day, and the past memories of the PlayStation Portable, or PSP custom firmware days, there was always a fascination of whether the PS Vita could be exploited. You have to understand that back then, the PS Vita was a very secure console, even more secure than hacking a PlayStation 3 or any iOS device. But hackers are a different breed, and very persistent. This led to them realizing that there were PSP titles on the PS Vita store, which means that there is some kind of emulation capabilities on it, meaning that there may be a chance that this can be exploited, and the hacking community couldn't be more correct. Early hacking. The very first kind of hacking done on a PS Vita was around 2013, when something called the Vita Half Byte Loader, or VHBL for short, was created. This was just HBO that was injected inside of a purchased PSP game on your PS Vita that allowed you to run homebrew and emulators on your PS Vita. In a way, this was the very early version of Adrenaline, without the full XMB functionality. I also need to mention that around the same time, the PSP custom firmware ARC was made available through the exploit, which was a PSP ISO loader. And a very talented hacker that called themselves Total Noob also created a series of Total Noob hacks, or TN hacks for short. These were TNV, a full PSP custom firmware, TNX, a PSP ISO loader, and TNC, basically the ARC custom firmware equivalent. All of these were documented and uploaded to the respective wololo.net website, mostly by the users Acid Snake and QuickRazor87, who actually taught me about Trinity custom firmware for the PS Vita back then, which I'll get to later. Although the hacking community was thriving, it was very easy for Sony to patch any exploit. If there was a PS Vita game that could be subject to an exploit, Sony would simply remove that PSP game from the PlayStation Store. Some time has passed, and on September 14th of 2014, 50 ePSP exploits have been released online by Acid Snake and QuickRazor87, but the hacking community was also split into two sides as well. Those who believe that the hackers will find a native hack like for the PS Vita, like the beloved PSP, and those who became unmotivated to continue and or decide to forget about the hacking community entirely. It's been 3 years and it wasn't looking good, and it didn't help that Total Noob and a friend of his had a fight, and this friend happened to be someone that helped with the TNX coding project, and messed with the code that resulted in the UXO PSP emulator, sound familiar, being deleted once TNX was loaded. Total Noob never had the best attitude in forums, and this fight ended up making him shunned in the community, and him going completely quiet. It was a sad time for the PS Vita hacking community, but sad times can usually result in a happy turnaround not soon after, which is exactly what happened. The birth of native exploits. Remember that person I mentioned named Acid Snake? He wasn't just someone posting in a Wololo forum. He also helped with the ePSP development alongside Quick Razor 87, which both had a hand in wanting to move forward with native PS Vita custom firmware. They both knew that this would not be an easy thing to do, and pondered several things to try. One day, around September 21st of 2014, they realized something. The PS Vita has a WebKit built in. To put it simply, a WebKit is an open source web browser that is used by most web browsers today, and it is what is used to load web pages. WebKits on a gaming device, however, are a golden ticket to any hacker. On a side note, this is also one of the reasons why the Nintendo Switch doesn't have a web browser. Running unsigned code through a WebKit is not an easy task at all, but the PS Vita hacking community began to get traction again, and more help was coming from all around the world. In the beginning of 2015, a WebKit exploit was found on firmware version 3.18 by a user named Hikim. Although it was just a simple package manager app, this awakened all the other hackers all around the world from the sheer announcement that it could be done. Around the same time, a user named Mr. Gas and another named FR-TomTomDo80, or now known as Major Tom, created the custom bubble method. This method is now used today for all of our homebrew applications like VitaShell and PKGJ. Progress was being made, but there was still people that wanted a native hack for the PS Vita. That all changed in June 14th of 2015. A talented group of hackers, Yifan Lu, XYZ, Davey, and Proxima, came out of nowhere with a YouTube announcement for the first ever PS Vita native exploit called Rejuvenate. This was done on a Vita toolchain, and the exploit was found inside the PlayStation Mobile Development Assistant, which Sony terminated the program soon after, and pulled the app from the PlayStation Store entirely. But later, Mr. Gas essentially created fake licenses that still made the app work. Rejuvenate only had a limited user base, but this still gained momentum for the community. Enough momentum to have Wololo create an entire homebrew contest called Revitalize. A lot of good came from the competition, like the creation of VitaShell by none other than the man himself, The Flow. But a lot of bad also came to it, like Yinfan Lu, completely leaving the PS Vita scene at the time. If you look at the comments on their Rejuvenate video, you can kind of see why. With Yinfan Lu gone, only Major Tom and Mr. Gas remained, and they both created a mail ticket exploit that basically allowed you to soft hack your PS Vita via sent mail. This ran the problem of having the need to be online to hack the PS Vita every time and wasn't permanent, but an offline version was later created. Near the end of December, the earliest form of PKGJ was created in the shape of a person-to-person sharing device called Blackfin Cobra. By the way, no relation to the PS3 hacking team called Cobra. Although the concept was cool, the team was a little sketchy, refused to send retail units to Wololo, and the price was enough for people not to want it at all. Because the team did not pay the creator of the program, they also leaked the entire program online, which resulted in the creation of PKGJ later on. Remember everyone, always pay someone for their work. Henkaku. In the beginning of 2016, something was teased that made the entire PS Vita hacking community uproar and excited, and Sony intrigued, startled, angry, and happy all at the same time. A PS Vita was shown on a custom firmware. Everyone couldn't believe it. Even some were calling them out and completely disregarding it. But little did they know, a new super hacking team was created and was responsible for the custom firmware teas called Team Molecule. This team was comprised of XYZ, Proxima, Davey, and Yifan Lu, who unexpectedly returned to the community. This exploit itself was done with a mail trick, which resulted in Sony going into a full war with the release of several firmware updates that patched it. But the exploit was later updated to be able to work offline as well, just like the old mail trick, with the help of XYZ. Team Molecule even released a contest at the time to reverse engineer Henkaku to find an even better way to use this exploit ROP chain, which the users Mike H and Stark completed. Some time after, another contest was created from the four main hacking forums: Wololo, PSX Place, PlayStationHacks.it, and custom protocol called Gekihen. This contest birthed very well-known homebrew apps called the Vita Homebrew Browser, later upgraded to VitaDB, Custom Themes Manager, and PFBA, which was a type of emulator. One thing about Yinfan Lu is, they don't endorse piracy, and refuse to give the necessary tools to make it possible. A new team was created during this time, however, to make it possible, called Team Freak. This team was comprised of Mr. Gas, Major Tom, and the now more experienced The Flow. They found a way to back up games via a newly created program called the Vitamin Dumper. Although the program was extremely promising, trouble arose soon after to tarnish the release. It was either a relative of Mr. Gas or a relative of Major Tom. One of them leaked the entire program before they could officially release it. The Flow straight up wanted to quit the entire PS Vita modding scene after this happened, but didn't, and decided to release Vitamin anyway. But Mr. Gas and Major Tom decided to leave the community permanently. Around the same time, a similar program was released by a Chinese developer named the MyDump tool, and this program was heavily speculated to be created by the leaked version of Vitamin. Vitamin, or Vitamin, created dumps in the form of a VPK, and MyDump tool created the game dumps in the form of a folder. Vitamin can work in safe mode, and the MyDump tool could only work in unsafe mode. Both methods had the potential of carrying viruses, however, so it was a very dangerous time, and also, at the time, Molecular Shell, Vita Shell's predecessor, did not have USB transfer support, which resulted in it only using FTP transfer or through a program called QCMA. So the time it took to even get these types of files were a nightmare. The PS Vita hacking community were still thriving, and it continued to thrive even more with the next release, Henkaku. On December 27th of 2016, and I remember this day vividly, Henkaku, now called Taihin, was finally released. This custom firmware release is what our PS Vitas on custom firmware use to this day. And the funny part is, this exploit is very similar to how iOS jailbreaking works. To put it simply, this exploit works by loading plugins onto the system to make things work. All of this could be done if your PS Vita was on official firmware 3.60. Quite a few plugins were released during this time, as well as an updated Vita shell that enabled USB transfer to work thanks to the Flow. The community still wasn't convinced to move away from firmware 3.18 to 3.60 until a program very similar to Total Noob's TNV called Adrenaline was released by the Flow as well. Adrenaline back then was semi-difficult to install compared to the method we know how to do today. By the way, on June 9th, 2017, The Flow, the new, promising developer, later revealed that he was in fact Total Noob all along. The entire PS Vita community, including me, was in total shock. He also later revealed that Adrenaline was basically TNB. At this point in time, Henkaku was still in a temporary custom firmware stage, meaning that it had to be activated every time you rebooted the device. But later in the year, Team Molecule gave us yet another gift. Enzo. On July 29th of 2017, Team Molecule released Enzo for firmware 3.60, the first ever permanent custom firmware. There was no need to put it on custom firmware after each reboot anymore, and the entire PS Vita hacking community was sold, and basically everyone migrated to 3.60 at that point. Alongside Enzo was the creation of two micro SD card adapters for the PS Vita. The PSVSD, created by Yenfan Liu, and the SD to Vita that was created by XYZ. This was the time that the Vita hacking scene started booming. The Flow created the non-PDRM plugin, which made the PS Vita items work despite being on a lower firmware. Another dev named Motoharu at the time created a one-to-one cartridge dumping tool as well, which I strongly will continue to hold a candle to because in my eyes, this program is actually the best one created for PS Vita game preservation. Motoharu also created several other PC tools called PSFPSV tools, which did what Vita Shell could do as far as decrypting PS Vita items, but on the PC. Vita Hex started releasing a series of UI changes to the PS Vita, like the Nintendo Switch UI via their Hexflow launcher, which made the PS Vita look like a Nintendo Switch. More and more homebrew games were released as well, which people saw a rise in homebrew games being created in Lua. Another very cool plugin with the combined efforts of Renegatamente and Zerpi was created to allow the PS Vita screen to have its video captured and displayed on a PC screen. Now I know this question probably crossed your mind, but what was Sony doing during all of this time? Well, they were trying every way possible to stop anything further from happening by removing activation from 3.60, completely stopping Adrenaline from working, issuing out several firmware updates, and creating every avenue possible to get people to update their firmware. Team Molecule and Team Freak were still hard at work on everything, and the PS Vita hacking community was still growing. In 2018, Vita GL was announced, which made 3D homebrew games a lot easier to create. At the same time, Vita 3K was released as well, and several game ports and homebrew were being created. Enzo's source code was released, and the Flow built a 3.65 Enzo installer for firmware 3.60 to allow it to go to 3.65. On July 1st of 2018, the Flow released the second huge exploit, H-Encore, for 3.65. H-Encore did not have much support like 3.60 did at the time, so few people wanted to go that route. H-Encore was just temporary custom firmware after all, and Sony had patched so much up until this firmware to make things even harder to work on that custom firmware side. But that didn't stop anyone in the hacking community to moving towards the future. PS Vita's security finally defeated. The PS Vita security system was actually defeated in the funniest way possible in 2019 by brute force. If you don't know what brute force is, imagine you trying to get into someone's phone but they have a passcode, and you try passcodes over and over and over again until you unlock it. That's brute force. So XYZ proceeded to brute force their way into the creation of ReFood. To put it simply, ReFood allow you to play PS Vita games that required the firmware 3.69 and up, despite you being on a lower firmware. Modoro and Trinity custom firmware was also released during this time. Trinity custom firmware was used for the purpose of putting your PS Vita in a state of temporary custom firmware so you could use Modoro to downgrade to either 3.60 or 3.65 to run permanent custom firmware, where by this time both were essentially equal permanent custom firmwares at that point. Trinity custom firmware had the coolest boot animation that paid homage to the movie The Matrix, and even being named as one of the main characters. Food control capabilities also revived PSM, which made it possible for the development and games in Unity to be made by anyone. This brought out several homebrew contests like the 2019 Vita Game Jam, the Vita Doc, and the Vita Nuova bounty list. Vita Game Jam and the Vita Doc were unfortunately both scams, but good did come out of both. A lot of very amazing homebrew apps and games were created from Vita Game Jam, and because the original person didn't pay Crash Cortez, the person that worked on the software for the Vita Doc, he ended up releasing the program so people can make their own with a Raspberry Pi motherboard. During this time, I was also living in Okinawa, Japan, and growing my PS Vita collection bit by bit, but the world unfortunately took a bad turn for all of us. Emulation and port era. COVID-19 was running rampant, and everyone in the world was trying to adjust to it, with new stay-at-home orders, teleworking, changing guidelines, and all in all, unfamiliarity. This did, however, create new opportunities to learn new hobbies, continue with things you never had the time to do before, and catching up with people you haven't in a long time. Everyone was trying to make good out of a bad situation, which is exactly what the PS Vita modding community was doing. The Flow released a plugin that allowed you to do save states on PSP games. SK Gleba released PSP2 HFW, and this allowed hybrid firmware creation. Enzo EX was created and continually updated so users can have full control of their PS Vita. The N64 emulator was made possible, including ports to some very beloved games. Even my beloved PS TV was getting resolution upgrades. The mystery port of the PS Vita 1000 Wi-Fi 3G model finally got a use created out of it as a mass storage input. A year later, in 2021, the ports did not stop coming either. The Flow worked hard to bring his childhood favorite game, GTA San Andreas, to the PS Vita, and was very successful. Android game ports started happening as well, and so much more. The final honorable mention that I will do for this section is for a user on Wololo named Chimera Eater, who was responsible for making the last PS Vita homebrew contest called KOTH. It was a massive contest on all 4 PS Vita hacking websites mentioned before that was geared towards the community making amazing homebrew games and more. This was also the first successful contest to ever be ran for the PS Vita hacking community, and this person was also the main source for the information for this video. So before I get into the closing section, I'd like to give a big shout out and thank you to Chimera Ida, and I hope I'm saying that name right, for making this video possible. The future. Now, after learning all this, it's kind of unreal to think that you couldn't just install custom firmware on your PS Vita without using a computer, let alone having an SD to Vita to have more storage. But I remember it all too well. The tweets, the hype, the good and the bad, the hackers and the script kiddies, Team Molecule and Team Freak. It's quite the crazy story. Just know that I don't think Sony really ever had any bad blood with the hacking community at the end of the day. It kind of was more of a testament to how far a community will go to show you the true potential of a device you made, and I wouldn't be surprised if another handheld was announced in the near future. It's a great memory of mine working graveyard shift at a store that rhymes with tall greens, and saving up for the launch Wi-Fi 3G model with Borderlands and getting Freedom Wars, which to this day is still my favorite PS Vita game. In closing, this video was made because of the passion I had for a video game handheld, the hacking community that was tied to it, and last but most importantly, you, the viewer. Thank you for learning from my tutorials, enjoying the videos, asking questions, saying a good or bad comment, and thank you for subscribing. This is Technic, happy hacking, and I'll see you all in the next video.